Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Dad. It is Francis, and today I have with me Dave. I should have asked you how to pronounce your last name. Dave Infante.
Infante. Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah. Dave, I brought you on because you wrote an article following a subject that I have followed a few times on this show as well, the Armed Forces Brewing Company. They have finally reached the end state that we all knew that they would eventually get to, which is being broke and crying about the woke mob, mostly because they spent their entire time broke and crying about the woke mob too. So, Dave, let's talk about this. So, what is the history that you have with Armed Forces Brewing Company? I'm sorry. First, the reason why you wrote about this, you write for a website called VinePair that talks about wine, beer, news, I assume cheeses, coffees, teas, things like that. All the kind of little things that come along with having a nice drink, having a nice evening, right?
Sure. Yeah. VinePair covers what the trade refers to as the beverage alcohol industry. And I've been covering beer, wine, and spirits, especially beer, for about 15 years for a variety of different publications. I work as a journalist. I'm these days based in Richmond, but I've been sort of all over the Eastern Seaboard working, covering the multi-billion-dollar business of booze in this country. So I had come across Armed Forces Brewing Company back in, I want to say 2021 or so. They published a promotional video featuring former Navy SEAL Rob O'Neill, sort of done in the Dollar Shave Club mode. I don't know if you remember that viral video. Yeah, very popular viral video from like 2014, 2015. Really hit it big for that like mail order razor club. Mm-hmm. And in really set, I think, like a benchmark for like viral content advertising. I think like it was very of its era in 2014 or whenever it first came out. Armed Forces Brewing Company was very behind the times when it published its own version of this with Rob O'Neill in 2021, but nevertheless, it went pretty viral in sort of conservative corners of the internet.
It kind of went viral for the rest of us because we were making fun of it too.
Yeah, there was definitely that second order effect for sure. Yeah,
it's an absolutely, if you don't remember it, the Armed Forces Brewing Company had a website or an advertisement that was them walking around what seemed to be a big warehouse full of beer, which was not theirs. We find out later. And the entire time they're either fake shooting off guns or they have hot women in bikinis. Like really going for that. It's a advertising schema that would have worked in maybe 2011. But in 10 years later in 2021, I am at this time, 2021, I'm in my late 30s. Now I'm in my early 40s. Those things don't hit like they used to back during the surge years and back when everything was all about, guns and tits. And look, I appreciate both of those things, but, don't use them to advertise to me like I'm an idiot. This isn't Spike TV circa 2009. Right. You gotta be a little, like, I'm looking for a little bit of seriousness out of my veteran owned and operated alcohol thing, which I gotta say is another thing. Look, veterans have enough problems with alcoholism. I don't really see, like, especially somebody like Mikuya, fucking Robert O'Neill, who has an alcohol problem, being the main, one of the main spokespersons for a company like this. So
yeah, no, he was the national brand ambassador at the time and also a board member as listed on the filings that they submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission, because the whole point of this video was that they were raising money through a process called equity crowdfunding. So they were selling shares in the company to unaccredited investors, for, I think it was like $200 a pop.
Yes, $200. Yeah. You get some stickers or a hat, depending on, and you get the shares, but you don't actually get any kind of voting rights. You just get shares.
Yeah, they were like Class C shares. You basically all the board members controlled the voting shares, and then you're kind of these second or third class citizens. And this arrangement in beer is actually like a little bit maybe more common than you might think. Like this was pioneered by a grifty company from Scotland called Brewdog, going back like 15 years or so. They've had a tremendous amount of success doing equity crowdfunding, and they ported that model over to the United States, I want to say in like 2017 or so. And, net, I think they've raised somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million across all of their various rounds of fundraising. And Brewdog is a very big craft beer company. It's not doing very well because it's not really built on a solid financial foundation, and its brand is kind of toxic and whatever. But I say that to say, Francis, that the Armed Forces Brewing Company was traveling a path here that had proven, at least, in some cases within this sector, to be able to generate an enormous amount of fundraising among these, among sort of like the target, the mark, who might be interested in buying these shares in the first place. You can kind of imagine the type.
Right. Look, everything that is coded heavily right wing, I just assume is a grift. And as it turns out, once again, we are correct that this was a grift of some kind, because what it came down to is that, much like I think Grunt Style had this problem where you have a company that is hemorrhaging money and you don't have people who are in charge who, one, take it seriously, or two, are honest about it, and they just end up hiding everything. And then suddenly, like, obviously Grunt Style is still around, but they had their problems with the crunches where they weren't making enough money, so they're asking people to work for free, or the CEO's like, oh, we're down here, we're working in the warehouses too. Like, that idea of like, oh, we're trying really hard, but what it shows is that you're fucking struggling, and it's probably because people think that you suck. Now, I do see Grunt Style t-shirts still all the time, so obviously their t-shirt store is still going perfectly fine, but Armed Forces Brewing Company also attempted to do this like, we're going to be unapologetically American. And unfortunately, what that always means is unapologetically like right-wing and racist. It did not help that Robert O'Neill, during this time when Armed Forces Brewing Company was trying to gain a following and do fundraising, that O'Neill went and said called transgender people pedophiles, and then got shit-faced in an airport bar, called the security guys who were trying to help him get back to his room racial slurs. So again, alcoholism, probably not the greatest thing to advertise with this guy, but I guarantee you that it's just kind of like, how you see Shaquille O'Neal advertising everything, like, but things that just make no sense. Like, he advertises the car insurance for the general, but also Epson printers. I don't know why, other than somebody showed up and was like, here's a check for you to show up and say these lines, and then you can fuck off and you never have to deal with this again. Unfortunately, as we see, that is an incredibly toxic and stupid idea, especially with this guy. But again, they're trying to push on this, anti-woke, anti-left, we are patriotic and we are American. And like, really, you can do all of that without being an asshole, I feel. Like, you can be, it's been a long time since conservative and not asshole have not been, a complete circle of a Venn diagram. But I feel like even if you wanted to say, like, we want to do things for veterans, we have more traditional values, sure. But you can't be an asshole to everybody. And it's not just this video that they put out. They were just assholes to everybody, not paying bills, not filling out correct permits, not doing anything with the local community, just telling the local community to go fuck themselves. They're going to do whatever they want. Turns out local community doesn't like things like that. So it's a big cascade of just bad management and bad decisions here.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. I want to point out a couple of things. One, like the Shaq, endorsement sort of spree that he's been on ever since leaving the NBA 20 years ago, I think is, in some ways a good comp for what Rob O'Neill's up to with Armed Forces Brewing, or at least was. But I will note that, like, he obviously has some alignment with at least like the pretense of this business. I mean, the business exists, I'm obviously very skeptical of it because I've covered it for years, but on its face, the business exists to like celebrate military stories and like respect to the troops. And, there's CEO, Chief Executive Alan Beal of Armed Forces Brewing Company, who I've interviewed, claims repeatedly in his public statements to friendly press like Fox News that, we're hiring all these veterans and this is the whole point. And I will also note, to their limited credit here, Francis, but like, I will also note that like Armed Forces Brewing, once they get to Norfolk, they do make efforts to like at least superficial efforts, who knows how substantive they were, to connect with, the community, but it's always on their terms, right? Like it's always on, in ways that align with the mission that they want to portray to the world, like, a Toys for Tots drive or,
Sure.
So like there are some like green shoots of this, but like, first of all, they're not remarkable. Lots of breweries do this without being assholes, as you sort of know. And second of all, like they're not interchangeable with the day-to-day legwork of community relations in the business of running an on-premise hospitality space, like a tap room, right? Like it's great that, maybe you have a mission to hire veterans or to give to charity, but that doesn't really absolve or exempt you from like treating your physical neighbors up the street with respect and showing up to the civic board meetings where approval is, yes, typically a rubber stamp. But in 2023, when they were, sort of looking to get approvals from these various community boards in Norfolk and the Norfolk Planning Commission and whatever, sources again and again told me that they were like astonished that Beal and other employees, representatives of Armed Forces Brewing, didn't even kind of check the box of like, being up to speed on what was expected of them at these meetings and showing up to like make nice. And even if this stuff is, very rote, it's a low bar that other businesses around the city and around the region had cleared. And it's part of, respect for the community that you're moving into. It's part of showing that you're an honest dealer. You're still trafficking in alcohol, right? Like this substance has well documented downsides in terms of, community composition and whatever, cultural hygiene, however you want to say it. And like people want to know that you're a serious person and that you're whether or not you agree with the same partisan politics that they do, that if there's a problem, they can pick up the phone and say, hey, what's going on here? And you're going to answer on the other line. You're going to say, I'm going to make it right. And like, there are thousands of breweries in this country. This is not reinventing the wheel. There's a rubric for what's expected of people who operate breweries in communities. And, and again, my reporting and others reporting on this just indicates that Armed Forces was really not following that rubric, was not really trying to meet that, or was certainly not doing so consistently and successfully during its short tenure.
Yeah, you can. I live in St. Louis. St. Louis has the Anheuser-Busch World headquarters, but we also have a lot of small breweries and tap rooms all over the place. And ours stick around. I have not heard of many that have opened up and failed because we are a very drinking city. And yeah, all of these places, if I do go to them, or if you read about them, you will see that they are in really cool parts of the city, and they understand that being in these cool parts of the city requires you to not be an asshole to everybody around you. And to, as you said, understand, like I'm selling alcohol, or we're doing, we have a restaurant, we're selling beer. We have this particular clientele that we're expecting. Let us, work with the local people to make sure that they're all good with this. And yeah, if you don't that's one of the first mistakes that you can make is pissing everybody off around you, because those are the people that you want to come and spend money at your spot, at your lunch spot, dinner spot. You want people to say, oh, I'm going to get off of work and I'm going to go grab a beer at the Armed Forces Brewing Company. And they're not going to do that if you're just a complete asshole to them. Like, even if everything is perfectly fine, even if there is no problem with the clientele and there's no fights in the parking lot, or anything like that, if you're an asshole to me, that's sticking with me. And it sounds like that really stuck with a lot of the people here in Norfolk too.
Yeah, I think, Armed Forces certainly rubbed a lot of people the wrong way with the way it came in. I'll note that even, this is back going to, I want to say July 2020, summer 2023, their plans to move into Norfolk to this brewery space that was operated by a craft brewery that was planning to vacate the lease and close down as a business. It was concurrent with an announcer that the announcement either was made by Governor Glenn Youngkin of Virginia or was, concurrent with the press release from Youngkin. And Youngkin is, to the extent that the GOP has rising stars that are not directly related to the Trump family, I mean, I would say that Youngkin is kind of one of them, right? Like he's expected to make a Senate run for Mark Warner's Senate seat. Mark Warner's a Democrat in Virginia, and he's up for re-election, and Youngkin is expected to make a run at it as the Republican challenger. He's also been batted around as a name for a potential. I mean, people were kind of wondering if he would run in 2024, and certainly I think people are throwing his name around as a potential for 2028. I mean, who knows what the electoral system will
yeah,
look
let's
like,
not get ahead of ourselves on 2028.
But my point is that like he's very much a partisan figure. This is not kind of like the Larry Hogan type of Republican governor who's like, well, he's just like a reasonable business, like I don't want to go to bat for Hogan. But my point is that like Youngkin dabbles in the culture war himself. He rode the coattails of sort of the critical race theory panic of 2021, fully ginned up by Republican operatives. He rode that into the state house in Virginia. He's not, if you're looking to remain apolitical with your military-themed brewery, you might take steps to distance yourself from someone like Glenn Youngkin. And instead, you see Armed Forces Brewing really embrace Youngkin. Alan Beal, the CEO, had photos with Youngkin on his Instagram. Youngkin is touting Armed Forces Brewing Company, coming to Norfolk, and the state economic development arm lined up around my reporting at my newsletter Fingers shows that they lined up about $300,000 in potential tax incentives to get the company to come here. They called the sort of courtship, the economic courtship there, they called it fucking Project Seawolf, which was deeply corny in my opinion. But like I obtained through public records request the like dossier they put together to try to
Who's putting a wolf in the sea? That's the question.
Well,
that is not where they belong.
I think Armed Forces Brewing had like maybe they still do, like a Seawolf IPA or something.
Yeah, they did.
One of their brands, So I think that was the genesis or the etymology there. But my point is that like even from the jump, so the first time I interviewed Beal in 2021, he at least like sort of paid lip service to the idea that like, oh, supporting the military should just be like bipartisan. That's not political, whatever. And it's like, yeah, I mean, that's not true, right? Like I understand what you're doing here because I wasn't born yesterday. And I challenged him on that at the time. But like his contention was that this was not a partisan, project. And if that were true, it would be in contradiction with the way that he and his company sort of came to Virginia, which, as I say, is like in a very partisan manner and at a time when everyone is hypersensitive to, especially in cities, is very sensitive to Republican revanchism and reactionary politics. It didn't hold any water, right? And so you have to question whether there was ever an intent to try to remain apolitical. I personally, based on my reporting, having followed this company for 5 years, like I'm dubious of that. I haven't seen much evidence that they were ever really trying to stay above the fray. My sense is that they were trying to embrace it and did, right up until the point where it kind of bit back.
Yeah. I mean, you don't get somebody like Robert O'Neill and say, I'm being nonpartisan. Like that's just, there are plenty of Medal of Honor awardees. There's plenty of Navy SEALs out there. Like there's a lot of Navy SEALs, and I'm not here to like say some Navy SEALs are good because I don't believe that. But some of them keep their fucking mouths shut, and that's the most heroic thing that a Navy SEAL can do is be a Navy SEAL and then not write a book about it. So, and O'Neill is one of those people. And yeah, I mean, like you said, there is no way that you create this video that they did and have all of this like incredible coding. Like, okay, supporting veterans is nonpartisan. I agree with that. Sure, both sides. You sent me to the stupid war. You should support me after the stupid war. But no Democrat, no leftist is like, do you want beer? How about these tits? Do these tits make you want to drink beer? Like, that's just not a thing that's going to be coded on, another side of the political spectrum. Sure. It just wouldn't work. If I tried to do this, people would think that I've lost my goddamn mind, or they would think that I'm doing satire of some kind, which maybe, but leaning into something like this, you're not saying, yes, I'm conservative, but you are putting out that like, hey, just so you guys know, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, this is the place where you can come where we like guns and tits and nothing's woke, which you can see because immediately, as soon as they bring Robert O'Neill in, he starts saying shitty things about the LGBT community, which, you know, you can't do that and expect people to not get pissed off. Like, even today, even in today's politics and society, I would still say that a place like Armed Forces Brewing Company is not, I mean, obviously, even today it's not going to work because they're fucking closed, but you can't lean into being an asshole to a specific group of people and think like, you know, those people just won't come here and drink, that's fine, because I am a straight white cis Christian male who's in the middle class, and I'm never going to go to a fucking place like this if you're acting like that. And there's lots of other people who are like me, you know, as we talked about, not supporting the people that are around you, not supporting the other businesses, also just not, you know, creating a place where I feel comfortable going. Like, it reminds me of that, I can't remember the barbecue place that would play like the national anthem at noon.
Oh yeah, Mission Barbecue.
Yeah, and then everybody, you've got to stop eating and stand and put your, like, I have to put my ribs down and put my hand over my heart. Do I have time to wet nap this? Can you give me a 60-second warning so I don't like get it all over me? It's just this ridiculous knee-jerk jingoistic patriotism that only speaks to one political ideology, and it's not mine. You know, I am a beer drinker. I like beer. I like supporting veterans. If this was a place that's like, hey, we, you know, here's our beers, we do veteran stuff, here's the veteran stuff we do, great. You know, maybe I will, maybe I won't, but I'm not going to like actively be against. I'm not going to make a whole podcast about how much you suck. You know, I'm going to at least, you know, say, well, you know, maybe this place will be all right. I will say there is, if you ever want to know how to do this correctly, in Branson, Missouri, there is a restaurant called Heroes. It's not a tap room, but it does have beers on tap, and it is it's a place that you can get, if you are a hero, you get a percentage off of your meal, but they have expanded that beyond just, you know, your first responders, your military, your firefighters, because it also includes farmers, it includes teachers, it includes nurses. Like, if you prove that you are, and it's been a minute since I've been there, but last time I was there, it's like, hey, if you can prove that you're any one of these things, we give you a discount, because, you know, understanding that heroes doesn't mean the guy with the gun necessarily. We need to support all of these people. And I know that when I say Branson, I know a section of my listenership rolls their eyes when I talk about how much I love Branson, but it is evangelical Las Vegas. You know, it's fantastic.
Real Branson heads know. Yeah,
they know. I like this too, because there's like, they give you the map direction. They're like, we're right next to the Titanic Museum, because that's just what Branson is like. But and we ate there. My wife's like, you know, we have to eat here now. Like, we passed by and it's like, we looked it up. It's like, you're going to get a 10% discount here. So we're definitely going to eat there. And it was good food. It was good food, and it wasn't annoying. Nobody ran up to me and said that. Nobody sang a song. Nobody made me do the Pledge of Allegiance or any of that bullshit, because I would absolutely not go to any place that's wanting me to do that. You can give me a 10% off or not, one way or the other, but I'm not going to like be your dancing monkey.
Yeah. Totally, sure, yeah. I'm not a troop myself, retired or otherwise, but I have family members who are in the military, and they tend to feel the same way, which is like it can be embarrassing and not pleasant to be in that type of environment where you're being sort of treated like a object of fascination rather than just a customer who's trying to eat a meal.
Exactly.
So I certainly get that.
Yeah, and you said you were talking about the charitable stuff that they're doing, but apparently Armed Forces Brewing Company wasn't doing anything charitable either.
Well, yeah. So this is, Beal, the CEO, has insisted again and again and again that this is, they like really wanted to do all this charity and this local woke mob, the, you know, sort of folks that he blames for running his business out of town, quote, polluted the market against Armed Forces Brewing Company by reaching out to nonprofits around the Hampton Roads area of Virginia and warning them not to work with Armed Forces Brewing Company on various charitable endeavors, like, for example, handing out Thanksgiving meals to people, or, as I mentioned before, the Toys for Tots drive, or whatever. You know, he sent me a litany of sort of grievances, complaints that he had against some of these people. I asked him, repeatedly for documentation on any of this stuff. And I never got it. So I can't say for sure that stuff never happened. Given my experience with O'Neill or with Beale, I'm very skeptical of the idea that they were actually doing the amount of, sort of charity work or nonprofit support or whatever you want to call it that he claims. It's possible, but I'm dubious of it.
Yeah, I think I saw that they donated $170 something to various charities over 1 year, which I donate to more charities than that.
Right.
But
that was
also,
that's right. On the 2024 filing. Yeah.
Yeah. But and also look, I also am in debt, but not like this. It seems so I also found an article from the Virginia Mercury that went into a little bit more details with some of the people who were working there. Not only, sure, the woke mob. I'm sure that pissing off everybody around you did not help. But also what doesn't help is not paying your bills. As it turns out, when you promise people money, they want that money that you promised them. The brewing company was not doing that. And then I also see that they rolled back, they were doing a big contract in Florida. And then it turns out that they didn't want to do business with Publix, which is insane because that's where you get food in Florida. I'm sure there are other places to get food, but Publix is the place where you get all of it. Just pulled out of that. A lot of decisions were being made that were not very sound. And that is reflected by a lot of the, many of the interviews that were done where people are like, we had a really cool team, and that's how it always is. I worked in the restaurant industry too. You can have a really cool team and the people who are running the restaurant, suck ass. And I'm sure that they did. And unfortunately they had to deal with a owner that sucks ass and who was not paying bills and was not making sure that rent was coming due on time. And even I also see they had a former, a guy who's been running brew pubs for years, over 30 years, helping stand them up. And he came to them. He's like, yeah, I'd love to help you guys out with this. Because originally they were doing what's called white label brewing, right?
Contract brewing is what it's,
they're not typically call it. Exactly. They're not the ones who are making the beer. They contract a place to make the beer and then they slap their label on it. So there was this, talk about let's, bring this guy in and start to bring things in. John Galanti in 2022, he came in as a sales director, but and told them, don't buy this huge building. You don't have any money for this. Don't do this. And then once they pulled out of Publix, he's like, I'm leaving. One of the only person who saw the writing on the wall gave his advice and said, if you're not going to follow my advice, I'm getting the fuck out of here, which I think is the only smart person in this entire saga is the guy who came in, said, here's how you fix things. And they said, we're not going to do those things. And he said, well, I guess that's enough for me then.
Yeah. Obviously I covered, like I said, the beer business, and that is kind of the broader context of this story. And I wrote about this in my column, and I've written about this with regards to other breweries that aren't nearly as embroiled in the culture war as Armed Forces chose to be. But the craft beer industry is a very challenging space to be in right now. The second boom that we lived through last decade is really fully over. Growth nationally is down, I think, about 3%, a little over 2% year over year for 2024. And that's after 2023, that wasn't positive growth either. It was down, I think, another probably 2-3%. So
we had a bit of a thing going on. Also the kids don't drink anymore. So
yeah, right. But so it's a very challenging space to be in. And Jim Morrison, who wrote the Mercury article that you're talking about, who's a great journalist, and he and I sort of have traded some emails about this company because we've covered it in the past as well. I covered it in 2023 and 2021, whatever. But Jim pointed out he pulled the SEC filings, which again, we have because it does equity crowdfunding. Most breweries do not have to file disclosures with the SEC, but this is core to Armed Forces Brewing model, is to raise money from unaccredited, investors to become shareholders. So sort of a double-edged sword there. One, you have this access to capital that maybe is, if not free, certainly very available, because there's a lot of rubes in this country who are dazzled by the troops and sort of the flag humping behavior that Armed Forces was pretty adept at. I mean, if they were good at anything, they were good at sort of crafting or packaging up promotional materials that appealed to that sort of id, conservative id. But, Morrison looked at the filings and correctly identified that the firm was about 4 million, had lost about 4 million, a little over 4 million in the past 2 years, 2023, 2024. I brought this up with Beal and I was asking him, why is this not just a basic story of we're undercapitalized and you didn't manage your cash flow properly, just like any other brewery that might have gone out of business? And he told me, I think he brought up Amazon and Facebook. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah.
Quote, even companies like Amazon and Facebook lost money for years before they became profitable, close quote. So, I mean, obviously, like, these are not reasonable comps for folks who don't understand the beer business. I mean, your listeners are smart enough to sort of suss out why that might be bullshit, but like, just to really spell it out, I mean, beer is a capital intensive business and doesn't scale in the way that, for example, digital media, Facebook, or e-commerce in the case of Amazon does. It's not that kind of business, and it never has been. No one has been valuing breweries at the types of multiples, even the heyday at the types of multiples that Silicon Valley unicorns are valued at. It's just not an honest comp. But you're right overall, which is that like this business was not doing well, and pulling out of Publix or pulling back from Publix and allegedly stiffing their contract brewer Brewhub, which is the name of the contract brewer. Although I will say that like Morrison's a good reporter and I trust his sources and he's legit, but I haven't been able to find full verification on that. Brewhub itself declined to comment, citing a confidentiality agreement. Again, I don't have any reason to believe it's not true. I mean, Beal wouldn't even deny it. He just kind of avoided the conversation or he avoided the question in our email exchange and declined multiple requests for a phone interview. So let's assume that that's probably true. Also, the rent was just astronomically high for this tap room. It was almost $550,000 a year, which is just a tremendous amount of money for a fleggling brewery. I mean, Francis, I don't know how much you or your listeners know about where we are with the beer industry right now, but like they're around 50% of available brewing capacity in this country is currently unutilized, right? Like we built an enormous number of breweries over the course of the past decade at a time where demand for beer was starting to slope, back to sort of a plateau. And as a result, all of this capacity comes online at a time when you just don't really need it. So a lot of breweries are operating at underutilized capacity. There's a much easier, I say that just to point out that there's a much cheaper and more cost-effective, more efficient way to brew beer for a young brand, which is to contract volume out and not buy a big building and only buy, maybe a small restaurant space to run a tap room, but brew your beer elsewhere. Armed Forces Brewing Company was kind of doing a mix of both things, and I haven't really been able to wrap my head around why they were contracting with Brewhub for package distribution, which is a tough game to be in because you lose a bunch of margin, not only to the distributor and the retailer, but also to the contract brewer that's brewing your beer in the first place.
Right.
But they were also brewing some of their own beer at this big facility that they acquired in Norfolk, and they didn't own it themselves. Two shareholders of Armed Forces Brewing Company owned it and then leased it to them for this enormous rent annually. So it's not illegal or anything, and it's disclosed in the financial documents. But those are kind of those like arm's length transactions that you often hear about with companies that go belly up. Is like, well, there's why were you doing this to enrich the shareholders that owned the building, or you could stumble into a narrative. And I don't think that it's disproven by the facts that we know at this point. I've seen no exculpatory evidence, so to speak, that it's not the case, that this was an inappropriate amount of money to be paying for rent because the people on the other end of the transaction were in bed with Beal.
Right. We have tap rooms here in St. Louis. I worked at one of them for a little bit. It was actually just a soda bottling plant, but they had a whole bottling line. I understand the want to have you can come and watch the beer made. That's how fresh it is. But at the same time, if you are contracting some of your beer out and then also making your own beer, feel like there's going to be a difference in your quality of what you're putting out. Although everything that I've read about Armed Forces beer has been moderate at best, that it's just an okay beer at its best way that you could describe it. Which, if you're doing white label stuff, I kind of understand that. Like, I've always kind of thought about, not with beer, but like we have a local coffee place, and racism coffee is also big in the military community. And I thought, what if I made the opposite of that with this local group? And I just haven't gone through it because I've got so many other irons in the fire, and I don't, like you said, margins, and it's a headache that I don't have the capital for, and I don't have the desire to do.
Well, it's just a business, and that's I think what a lot of people, maybe including Beal, who kind of stumble into this, because I don't know if you remember Ultra Right anti-woke beer from 2023. Does that ring a bell to you?
That specific name, no.
Yeah, so there was this sort of right-wing operative influencer grifter type guy named Seth Weathers who glommed on to the early backlash against Bud Light in 2023, April 2023, and launched again like sort of a viral video that went sort of wide in conservative circles about how Bud Light is whatever, trying to like trans your kids with gay beer or whatever. I
do remember this.
But I bring up him to say that like he got a lot of traction off that and was like, we're launching a beer company. This is like a real thing. We're really doing this. And then like, it's just been a series of like miserable, like arduous slogs for him to try to like fucking do this. Like he was complaining about getting like fingerprinted by the alcohol and tobacco tax and trade bureau, and like setting up distributor relationships, and quality was an issue, and then his contract brewer pulled out because they didn't want to be in business with someone like this once they realized what it was, yada yada yada. I say all that to say, like, it's just a fucking job, man. Like, if you want, like, printing t-shirts that say, like, fuck Joe Biden or whatever is fairly easy, right? You set up, like, a Teespring account and, like, you create a fucking series of Facebook ads that target, like, the dumbest motherfuckers on that website. And then you just, like, kick back and, like, wait for that mailbox money. I'm not saying that's good, but, like, it's pretty low barrier to entry, right? Alcohol is not like that. Beer is not like that.
Yeah.
You can't just spin up these businesses and try to capture these sort of very tight, small, fast-paced news cycles with these products that are regulated and that have unusual, convoluted routes to market and whatever. And so I think, Ultra Right certainly, and then to some extent Armed Forces, I think as well, had just like, they've just kind of bitten off more than they could chew.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe would have been better off in the Black Rifle Coffee model or the Grunt style model, where the product itself is much closer to like interchangeable, fungible commodity rather than something as regulated and differentiated as craft beer. It was all marketing and bluster and no, or at least very little from what I've been able to see, attention paid to like the nuts and bolts operation of running a beer company.
Yeah, you can't base your beer company off of vibes. You can do that with a t-shirt company. That's fine.
You can, right, totally.
I was looking at the Conservative Dad online store. There are two things that are in there. One of them is a case of beer for $38.99, which is sold out, and also Border Wall tequila.
Oh yeah, that's like super racist.
Yeah, the Wall, and it's TEEKEELAAA. So because we like the liquor from Mexico. We just don't like the Mexicans. Is I think what we're going for here. That's $50 for your racism tequila and making America great again. So I assume that the woke free conservative dad is also not doing great. If this is the only thing they have on their store.
They really hit the skids. They got an F rating from the Better Business Bureau, which is like hard to do from what I understand. They basically took a ton of people's money in summer 2023 and then just never shipped the beer for like
sounds
12
about right.
months afterward. Yeah. So like, and again, like partially, you could attribute this to maybe this was the plan all along. I can't safe, certainly, that it wasn't. I also think that like the more obvious explanation might just be what I was describing before, which is like running a beer company is fucking hard. And like this guy was in no way prepared to do it.
No.
And that doesn't excuse him from taking people's money and not delivering. But it is kind of a funny reality is like you didn't even have to act with malice here. You got yourself in over your head and just were incompetent and couldn't figure it out.
Let me tell you, conservative dad will not ship to those of you in Arkansas, Alaska, Delaware, Illinois, Hawaii, Mississippi, Minnesota, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, or Utah. So Missouri, I can still get my racism tequila if I need to get that. It says join our fight against Bud, which if they're trying to get me to give up weed, man, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, no,
I got off of booze because of weed. I'm not going back.
Right. Well, fair enough. A lot of people are going that direction.
Yeah, it's way cheaper, and I don't wake up feeling shitty. And nobody, my wife is not asking me what the fuck is wrong with me. You know, the little things that you have there to keep the marriage going. So yeah, in the end here, Beale says that this is woke. It's too woke. This is happening because of wokeness. The local area poisoned everybody around them to not come in because it was too woke. But like, it's never actually described what that means. Like I think the idea is that if this was in a vacuum, it's like, okay, they don't like that we're advertising with titties and guns. Like, look, most people will roll their eyes about that, myself included, but I'm not going to sit here and poison the well. I understand why Hooters is a popular place to go to. It's not just because of the wings. So I get that. But, you know, they don't bring in the fact that it's like, well, we also burned every bridge that we could with Robert O'Neill, which like they took him off of the website. And then once they got approved to move forward on this brewery purchase, they put him back on. Like a real fucking bait and switch there. That was
I think that's a important point, right? Is that like this is not just a matter of sort of like got off on the wrong foot type of thing, and you know, then there were these unreasonable activists that held a grudge. I'll say two things on that point. One is that I asked Beale, you know, if you're running a business and you feel like you're being defamed or harassed, you know, one of his contentions to me was that like these activists were like calling in fake police reports, right? Like, and getting the cops to show up and like shut the tap room down when it was like doing events or whatever on spurious noise complaints or I think whatever, like stuff like that, right? And then we're also using, this is his contention, we're using anonymous social media accounts to smear the brewery and its employees and whatever. If that's happening and you have a successful business and you have other indicators that like the business is working in the place that it's in and the community at large appreciates the business and is supporting it, which was Beale's argument, you know, that's what he claims. But it was just this like small hive of malcontents on the left that were blinded by wokeness to destroy this proud, you know, truth respecting business. Well, then the first thing that one assumes an honest business owner would do in that case is to mount a legal fight against these people, right? Like there are remedies in the justice system and even in, you know, on the civil side, I'm not even talking about criminal stuff, for, you know, defamation and for harassment and for, you know, even like, I'm not a lawyer, but like tortious interference, like things like that. Like there are other ways to handle this other than just like out of the blue one day shutting down your business, right? And I asked him why he didn't pursue those legal avenues before shutting the business down or pulling the business. By the way, I'll note here that like he claims that Armed Forces is not closing, it's just relocating. Take that with a grain of salt, but that is his claim, is that he will be relocating to a more how did he say it, like pro-business friendly environment or whatever. Yeah, it's like, bro, you're in Norfolk, Virginia. Like, there's no place that loves the troops more than the place where all of the troops live. So, well, and that's an important point too. Here is this is not again like an anti-military. Yeah, he didn't set up in Berkeley, California. He went to Norfolk. We also, I mean, I spoke with in 2023. I interviewed a guy who owns a brewery called Young Veterans Brewing Company in Norfolk, Virginia. His point was like twofold. One, he was dismayed or annoyed that Beale himself has never served in the military, which, is true. Beale has told me that himself. And he says he, quote, comes from a military family. So you can kind of take that to mean whatever
he's leaning on the valor of his family. Yeah.
Right. But the second concern was that, like, this guy who ran Young Veterans Brewery, which is still around, by the way, brewing company, excuse me, was just worried about the two of these businesses getting confused and people being like, oh, you're like affiliated with that. Like, I hate those guys. And his point was like, he wants to make sure that like people don't get confused between the two brands. But I say that because this is absolutely not a situation where they sort of forge their way into, a leftist enclave, like, whatever, downtown Seattle or Berkeley, as you say, or, Bushwick, Brooklyn, or wherever the other sort of like Sodom and Gomorrahs of urban decay loom large in the Republican mind. Like, this is not where they went. They went to Norfolk, Virginia, which is the home to the largest naval base in the country. And I think the largest active population of active duty Marines and naval personnel in the country as well. Certainly massive veteran population in that area, the Hampton Roads area of Virginia. This is about as pro-troop of an environment as you can find. I suppose San Antonio has some claim to it. Parts of California, like with the big bases out there, of course, have pro-military neighborhoods. But like, if you're just talking about like raw numbers, it is hard to find a more dense pro-military consumer base than the one you would find in Hampton Roads. And the numbers tell the story. I'm sorry, I just don't buy Beale's claim that this small group of activists was able to ward off hundreds of thousands of customers from coming, who would have otherwise gone to Armed Forces Brewing Company, who then decided not to because they saw some anonymous social media posts. That does not rate to me.
No, and it's the same kind of issue, like we said. They're doing this based on vibes. They're not doing this based on, I'm a savvy business person who knows savvy business things. It's, the decisions that were made here were reactionary and not, what can we do here to better serve our community? Which, like, if you're never asking that question, you're not going to do it. And also, as you said, like, I don't believe that everybody has to serve the military. In fact, I believe nobody should serve in the military. But, people are still going to do it. But if you're going to have something like this, it's nice to have the, bona fides of being in the military, but also that time in the military would probably teach you that this isn't going to fucking work. Like, this worked in like maybe 2009. But even in 2009, a lot of people were rolling their eyes at this kind of thing. The young 21-year-old veterans now have all been born after 9/11. They don't remember 9/11. And you got to get that into your fucking head, that they're young and they're of a completely different generation. And these kinds of things that worked on all the global war on terror veterans, because we're all a bunch of dumbass millennials, is not going to continue to work. It's just not translatable. You can't just keep doing guns and titties because the upcoming generation is jaded in their own way. You've got to find, whatever it is, whatever guns and titties that Gen Z likes. I'm not sure what that is. Zin package it like every
I was gonna say Zins and like Hellcats at like 39% APR or whatever. Yeah.
Look, buying a Dodge at 32% will always transcend every military generation. That's not going anywhere.
It's a rite of passage in the military.
Exactly.
Yeah. But isn't that fucking instructive? Is that it's not fucking pandering to the troops. It's just a product that appeals to their taste and sensibility, but it's not like fucking wrapped in, desert camo or whatever. It's it looks like a Hot Wheels. Like, it's the thing. It's not a version of the thing that's pandered, to a specific group. And I think upstream of everything else, of whatever happened in Norfolk and mismanagement or alleged mismanagement of cash flows and contract relationships and whatever, I think that's kind of core to this failure, is that people just smell bullshit, right? Like, people just don't buy it in the way that maybe they would 20, 30 years ago before the sort of boom of first and second wave social media and of, as you say, like the failure of the global war on terror and the enormous financial and human costs of those conflicts. I think people are just like much less impressed by this blind jingoism, even if they consider themselves Republicans or they, have members of the military in their family. I certainly there's always going to be some traction for it, but like, there's just no evidence that kind of like, who is it? Fucking Toby Keith, like booting your ass, like that song, like that type of that milieu has certainly passed.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's coming back, even as much as the Trump administration now, the Pete Hegseths and Marco Rubios and whatever of the world do their best to sort of enforce this vision of, white male warrior culture.
This ethos and culture that just doesn't exist
just
anymore.
Fighting upstream. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also has to do a lot with now, I joined in 2000 and I'm 41. And I feel like a lot of the people who were sent to Iraq and Afghanistan, especially during that first decade, that first 15 years of it, have come to the conclusion that it was a pretty fucked up thing and was completely useless and didn't do anything other than enrich some assholes. Now, not everybody is such a deep thinking podcaster as myself. However, I think it is kind of in the back of everybody's mind. And certainly I don't shy away from the fact that I'm a veteran, especially if it's going to get me 10% off somewhere. But I also don't make it a forward, like I need everybody to know that I'm a veteran because I feel like this is going, not just that it's going to get me something, but I'm proud of this. I'm proud of this heritage that I have of going to Afghanistan and sitting behind a desk for a year. That just doesn't exist for even people of my generation any longer. Like we're all in our 30s and 40s now. We're tired. We hurt. We've got real careers and we're currently watching the military fall apart. So, it just doesn't really, this kind of advertising and this kind of thrust forward in trying to get people in by having this specific, patriotic rap to it, just doesn't work. It doesn't work. Like you said, we smell the bullshit. We can very easily smell the bullshit. And it doesn't help that this is not the first time it's happened. You are not the first guy, not you, but Beale is not the first guy to set something up like this and lean really hard into this, hoping that you're going to create this incredibly loyal conservative fan base that's very small, instead of just saying, if you just appeal to more people, then you can have more money and people won't be mad at you. It's very simple. Just shut the fuck up. That's all. Just if you want to own a business, just shut the fuck up. Unless you want this to be a major part of your business, and then that's going to be a problem.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that there's an asymmetry to this stuff, right? Like it's very old hat, I suppose, to point out that the conservative operative or the conservative sort of ethos is hypocritical. But you look at something, I'll do it anyway because I do think it's instructive. You look at something like the Bud Light backlash, where Bud Light did not stake out a partisan stance, but they had a small one-off relationship with a trans influencer, and right-wing operatives took that and amplified that into a year-long stochastic conservative boycott against the brand. That did real economic damage, no doubt. The argument there was to the extent that there was a coherent one, was I'm not transphobic. I just don't want this. I don't want politics rammed down my throat, right? Like this was the claim, the contention was like the big woke corporations are trying to enforce their values on me, and I don't want that. I just want, right?
Can I just have a fucking drink and not think about politics? Like that's what I'm here for.
Well, but so that was their claim, and I bring that up just to point out that it's never that they don't want politics. It's that they don't appreciate politics that they feel like they are being, that are criticizing their own politics. And so the thesis that Beale brought to this, to paraphrase here, is the idea is basically what if we put forth something that shared the values of the customer base we want to reach? But the flip side is also true, right? Which is that there are many, many more people that don't want those values either. And so, yes, whether your advice for business brewery owners is shut the fuck up and don't state your values, or maybe another version of that would be don't make your core value proposition, partisan or polarizing value set. Whichever one of those you choose to advance, I think the underlying fact or the underlying logic of both is that people will only buy into this stuff so much. The product that they're actually buying, whether it's beer or coffee or fucking cell phones, because remember that like Patriot phone for a while that was they're not going to listen to you or whatever. And it turned out it was like made in China.
It always is.
Yeah, of course. But the point is, like, the thing still has to fucking work. It still has to be the thing that you want it to be. But, you know, Armed Forces Brewing Company's beer, reportedly, I've never tasted it. Reportedly, it was not very good. Like, you look at its Untapped ratings, you know, it's kind of middling. Some folks who have had it, whose palates I trust, say that it's quite bad. I think quality control, you know, maybe wasn't the best. Whatever. The Patriot phone, like, didn't fucking work or, like, didn't turn out to do the thing that it was supposed to do. Like, at the end of the day, if people are spending money on this stuff, they still want it to do the thing, whether it's going to be a virtue signal to, you know, compatriots on the left or the right. They still want it to do the thing that it's supposed to do. In the case of beer, taste good and get you drunk. And I think Armed Forces, in maybe its haste to run headlong into the culture war and the early positive signals it got from that because of its social media video and its business model that allowed for crowdfunding, you know, which becomes kind of a business in itself rather than selling beer, which is supposed to be the business. You know, maybe either lost sight of that or maybe never had sight of that in the first place. And I think that that's just not a winning structure for a brewery in a challenging market like the one that we currently have.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for taking time out to talk about your article. Where can people find you?
Yeah, check me out. So I publish a weekly column at VinePair. This was where my piece on Armed Forces Brewing appeared. But I also published a independent newsletter about drinking in America called Fingers. Fingers.email is where you can find that. Thousands of industry pros and drunks and everyone in between read it each week, and I would love to see you there.
All right. We will have all of the links to your website, to your article, and to the other article that I mentioned down there in the show notes. You guys, read this stuff. It's very funny. And continue to read Dave. Dave, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody else, we'll talk to you next week.
It's a pleasure.